Welcome to a new episode of the Open Internet Pod. Once again, I'm joined here by Richard Parris, co-founder of SATO. And today's topic is going to be something that is becoming more and more clear to us, right? The fact that the Panopticon, the surveillance state, is being built right before our eyes. It's being built in public. Some people might wonder why we keep going on and on about the importance of digital rights and individual sovereignty on the internet. And I think that the number of people wondering why we talk about the problems with digital IDs and other forms of control and coercion is going down each week. And the number of people who understand the issue is going up. That makes us very happy. So we're having a look at the Panopticon that is being built in public across Europe and America, but also the alternatives to surveillance state, some of which are also being built in public. And per tradition, I think we should kick off the show with some news items. As always, Richard, I think you're going to love this one. On EU Watch, we have chat control back on the menu. A crucial, potentially decisive interinstitutional trilogue.
A trilogue?
Trilogue took place on the 29th of June, on my birthday. Happy birthday. And yeah. I mean, one thing is becoming more and more clear. This should probably be the hill to die on for Europeans, because if this wall breaks, God knows what comes behind it, right? It's one of those things where you think that I'll get in later, but there might not be no later. And in case you guys don't know about this, there's something called fightchatcontrol.Eu. I encourage everyone to go there and find their country, the representatives, and send them an email. I sent around 50 emails the other day, so it is possible to just copy paste.
Yeah, I mean, for people who aren't necessarily aware of what chat control is all about, it's about listening on your device in various ways. There have been various versions of this put forward, but the basis of it has always been listening on your device before things go out over encrypted channels, etc. So it's a kind of mock way of letting you have the encryption, but your device is going to listen to you before things get encrypted and report bad activity or certain activity. Some of its forms have been knocked straight out of the European process because they've just been clearly against various regulations, but it just keeps zombie-like coming back in a way that tells you that there's a very strong push to get something like this in place. And yeah, it's I think, Alex, what about, it being a real line in the sand, a real hill to die on is really important, because if you get this, it's essentially like having that Stasi neighbor with their glass up against the wall, listening to check if you said anything they can report in digital form on your phone before you can put any, security in place or anything around it. And it really is quite disturbing, that something that has been put up, and you expect sometimes things like this to get put up by a particular group who didn't thoroughly research it or just had an idea, but it wasn't well thought through, and then it gets knocked down. And that's kind of happened, but it's come back and it's come back and it's come back in various forms. And it doesn't seem like something that people in the EU or anywhere can kind of give up the fight on, because it's really a total end to your device being your device, you being able to trust your own hardware, and you having any sense of being able to speak privately with anyone. So it really is a huge issue.
If you want to hear something funny about where this is going, think about this. EU representative, or maybe like a country representative, I think it was from Greece or Germany, asked the official EU AI, how do I get rid of Ursula von der Leyen? And got insta-banned from her account. That should tell you something about the character of these individuals and the tools that they're building, and why it is important to stand up against chat control. Because if they do that to the people that they work with, the people that put them in their current position, you can imagine how far they will go and how they see these things.
I mean, you've got how many languages in the EU and how many things that they're going to want to regulate in all these languages, so that the chance of being hit just with misunderstandings, let alone deliberate, attempts to control what's being said, are just too many to count. So yeah, that's a nice sage lesson there.
Yeah. I think, is there anything else you want to add to this story, Richard? Or
No, I think it's just I think we've been talking about how important it is. Bringing it back to the topic of the show tonight, it's one of those things where there's been nothing hidden about this. And I think we can see that, this has been right out there in the open. It continues to be out there in the open. They've been very open about wanting to do this. So this kind of coercive impulses are not being hidden at all anymore. And I think it's something to watch out for.
Yeah, I guess we should have put a building in public in quotes, because I mean, it is not necessarily in quotes, but it is it's the same concept, but it's like you could use a knife as a tool, or you can use it to do crime. And this is more like building in public to do harm. That's how I see it. It's
there is some of it which is I think some of it is Trojan horse, and not necessarily by the person who created the horse, right? So we saw with the US legislation that on age verification on hardware itself, that the activists that pushed for it kind of buddied up to and got their stuff included in things that were being put to legislators by other groups. So they kind of slid in with the people who genuinely had, the intention of whatever they were promoting with the bill. So, protecting kids or these sorts of things. And you can see that happens regularly. I think we can see that chat controller just went all out first up, but in some of these cases they come out with a kind of, you have to give us all your data about everything ever, and then they kind of rattle it back and say, oh, actually no, we just need this personal identifying information. It's not too much. And people feel like less intruded on because they didn't have to talk, provide information about their sex life, but they're still giving away every other piece of private information they have. And I think that's the kind of methodology we're seeing more and more across the board.
The next topic of discussion, or the next news item that we have, it's a warning from Google to the EU that its plans to weaken Google's monopoly could expose user data. Heather Atkins, Google VP of Security Engineering, told Wired that the EU's proposal could lead to serious security and privacy issues. The political changes come in two forms. First, regulators want Gemini dethroned as the sole integrated AI service on Android. This would mean letting users integrate other AI models and give them Gemini-like system access. Separately, the EU wants Google to share anonymized search data with other companies. And this is what Atkins had to say. If implemented as described today, I think within a short period of time on Android would see a significant increase in fraud in the EU. And, we have known for years that it's possible to unmask people in supposedly anonymous data. In fact, Google suggests that broad availability of powerful AI models make it easier than ever to de-anonymize large data sets. So are we, sleepwalking into a hell of our own making, if I may use that expression?
I remember going to conferences and people talking about how you could use like various information about the browser, et cetera, to fingerprint people. You didn't really need to use cookies and so forth. And that was around the time of the introduction of GDPR and stuff like that. And I mean, the Google spokesperson is quite correct. It's getting easier and easier to do that stuff. The cross-referencing and data processing we can do now is just phenomenal compared to what it was before. What that shows, I think, is it's the same misthinking in both cases. It's kind of like saying, well, I think we'd put the public at risk if you made me take the uranium that I've been collecting in my house out of my house and to some other facility, because it would have to go through the public streets. Now, that's true. The problem is not the plan to get rid of the uranium. The problem is, why have I been collecting it in the first place, right? And I think in both of these cases, I think it's really sensible if you're going to regulate. The right sort of things to be regulating is things like you can't have AI baked into the operating system. You have to have an API that lets different AIs be pluggable into the operating system. Just the same as we had antitrust stuff around which browser you can use, which I'm very glad we had, because otherwise you'd have no choice but using the least privacy respecting browser. And this is good, because if you are going to plug AI into your OS, I'd rather use one that of my choosing and that has controls that I want, etc. The real issue here is not so much that, which is a good thing to be regulating and makes sense. It's in both cases, why have we got the uranium in the first place, right? So why are Google collecting all of this data? Why can't we interact with them truly anonymously? So it's not a matter of de-anonymization. It's a matter of they never had anything to link together in the first place. And similarly with the phone side of things, why is our identity so heavily connected to our phone that we are at risk from these things happening, etc.? People do need to learn when dealing with AIs to keep themselves private and to think very carefully about how to session segregate and how to, not ask too many of the same questions in the same context space so that they can be identified. That's a skill I think people need to learn in the same way we need to learn, generally how to live with most new technologies. But the issue really here is this sort of the existence of these forced identities on people. You can't, it's hard to reuse identities. We have to log in, for instance, with things like Google. And so they've immediately got this information on us. Very interesting topic around de-anonymization, but I think the kind of focus here is totally on the wrong thing. You could say this about social media bans for under 16s. The issue isn't kids having access to things. It's why are companies allowed to develop crack cocaine and deploy it? If people want to access it, sure, but they shouldn't be able to necessarily profit by it. Why are we forced, to have identities that lock us into those things so that we can't, move about between them freely? Why is it that if we are addicted to them, it causes us other problems? Those are the things I think that really get missed in this topic.
Yeah. I think you're asking what Jonathan Pajot would call the Grail question. Who does this serve? And I think it's a very pertinent question because it obviously not serving us. It's not serving the children. It's not serving society. So who does it really serve? And if we cannot answer that question, why are we still doing it? Is the capitalist monetary incentive, this desire to prove that we have worth or that we're better than everybody else, is that worth sacrificing so many things for? Like if we're willing to sacrifice the future of our children just so we can say that we won some AI race or something like that, then obviously there's a deeper question to be asked there. In a new interview on Be Giant, a longtime fan of the show, Cory Doctorow, rings the alarm bells on the perils of AI, because we're talking about AI. Using the institutification of the internet as a corollary, he says, and I quote, "I think that as a society, we have such bad object permanence. We don't remember that things that made the internet terrible weren't the great forces of history. They weren't the iron laws of economics. We didn't get hit by an internet-killing meteor. It was specific people who made decisions that had the foreseeable and foreseen outcome of making the internet terrible." So, when capital gets to decide how automation is used, it almost universally prefers throughput over quality. That's because when you have an asset that's depreciating, you want to use it as fast as possible. So I guess in a way, we're answering the previous question of who does it serve, right? We're answering our own question. But is this the issue that we're facing today, Richard? People want better lives through AI, internet and tech in general, while capital and bureaucrats just want to squeeze the masses while they can, or...
Yeah,
how is that?
At the risk of on various topics being a Doctorow fanboy, despite the fact I disagree with him on a bunch of stuff too, I really love his not his take on AI, but the way he discusses it. This reverse centaur concept. If you're not familiar with it, what he's talking about is, a human on a bicycle is essentially a centaur, right? You've got the thinking mind part up top, and the bicycle is this augmented machine human that can propel us quickly through the world. And this is a very beautiful mix of things, right? You haven't lost your humanity in any way, but you've gained the ability to speed through town, faster and further than you ever would before. It's a good thing. And what he's saying is that with technologies, when we get it wrong, and specifically in this case with the reverse centaur description, it's about AI, but I think it follows across what we've been saying. We've got this backwards. So essentially, we've got a machine piece of tech being kind of augmented onto the human as the bicycle part. Right. And it's never happy with how fast the human can run it around town. Right? And it's also completely backwards. It's dehumanizing the human in their role in this. And it's elevating the machine to a role it really shouldn't have. The centaur is kind of backwards. Right. You've taken the worst of the two creatures and you've put them in a situation that damages both in a way. Limits both. And I think, partially Doctorow's conclusion and argument, but also I think clearly once you take his analogy on there, you can see, that's a lot of what's happening with AI is that the people who get to deploy it, because it's expensive and big, are looking at how do they get people to serve it? How does the corporation get the AI to work, and what do they need in terms of people serving it? Rather than how can this be the other way around? How can AI tools make people more effective, speed them around town, as it were, get them to do more cool and wonderful stuff? And I think, the great thing, particularly as a software developer or anyone who's used AI and had fun with it, it's that great feeling of it making you more productive, it making you able to prototype ideas or create things at a level you couldn't without it. That's a real thrill and a real human buzz rather than the other way around. And I think we can look at the internet the same way. So who does it serve, right? What's its purpose there? Is the internet helping me communicate and connect with people and express myself and enrich myself in various ways? Or am I being used as data fodder for a machine that's extracting value out of me and concentrating it elsewhere? And I think the answer is obvious and clear in the most of our interactions online. And to Dr. O's point in that quote, we could have kind of seen it coming. And we kind of missed that it's a result of how we let people who were pushy about it and making money out of it shape the internet, not how it has to be by design or by economics or by any other reason.
Right. I mean, you could also look at it, using the tools that they are building and the tools that we are building, right? They're building tools for more and more centralized control and algorithm control, and SATO's building a more peer-to-peer communication, social media, commerce.
I think we've talked about that kind of hand-in-glove aspect of things like identification and the kind of corporate and regulatory world, right? So I think they crib from each other, right? So regulators see how internet platforms concentrate information and power into very singular places, and if they don't get jealous, they at least learn a lesson that that looks useful. It would empower me or increase my power in this situation, make my job easier. Is possibly how they think about it. So I think you can see these are the obvious effects of building platforms where all the information goes in one place, where users, rights have to be defended by flimsy legislation rather than in the design of the platforms themselves, etc. And where we don't do things collectively, like have at least antitrust in front of these things. Instead, we've got the opposite, where the creation of these centralized large internet companies then kind of plays into being able to kind of have a cozy relationship with regulators, shall we say, where they kind of just divvying up the pie between who gets what out of that, rather than people sitting back and saying, well, how should this actually work in favor of people? And I think that's why I'm so dedicated to building peer-to-peer tools, because I think it has to be about these interactions being human and peer-to-peer, and then you get natural, greater things coming out of that organically, right? So you get societies and you get organizations and you get movements, but they come from organic interactions the way that they have throughout history, rather than in the way that can be manipulated because the essence of all this communication is centralized into points. And that's either for financial gain in terms of why companies would want to do that, or political power in terms of why governments and regulators would want to do that, because it helps them manage and control, because there's not sort of organic ability for movements and thoughts and things to get out and around.
Yeah, no, I agree completely. And it's a very valid point that you're making over there. Before we get into the show questions, I just want everybody to know that this also is coming out as a pod. It's called the Open Internet Pod. You can find us on your favorite pod app, and
so people can see these, right? Like the
yes, that's why they're there. Yeah. So let's go into the show questions, Richard. This idea of building in public, it was a way for startup founders to connect directly with consumers and build community and ultimately even have a distribution channel. What we are witnessing today is an enclosure being built in public, not for transparency, but because for one reason or another, the powers that be have yet to control and coerce all media outlets, right? For example, we can still do this on X. For how long, we don't know. But this might be an unanswerable question, but why aren't more people up in arms about this? Are we just too overstimulated to notice or care? Or
yeah, I mean, I think that's a lot of it. Why don't people stop eating the junk food? It's obvious it's making them fat, right? Like, well, no, it's delicious, and there's a lot of distractions going on. You don't necessarily pay attention to everything. I think that's one big reason. Another one is, I get to use my favorite paradox from studies in philosophy. Another one is it's the paradox of the heap, right? The paradox of the bald man, right? Pull one hair out of a man's head, he's not bald yet, so therefore you can pull them all out and he's still not bald, right? You've got this thing of it's a boiling frog, right? People haven't seen people don't step back and look at the progress of it. They just accept each piece as it comes along. Now I need to log in. I didn't used to need to log in. Oh, well, I suppose I'll use my login with Google. Oh, it's fine. No worries. And it's 1,000 little steps like that. So I think that's a large part of it, along with the fact that, the dopamine stream is so delicious. I mean, most people who signed up for things like Facebook and Instagram didn't sign up for what they are now, but they've accepted it because the product managers have very carefully been crafting each step to be more and more pleasing than the last. And they've discovered these things not by accident or not by cunning plan in a laboratory somewhere, but they've been experimenting in public on people step by step. And I think what we've seen is that process now has been learned by everybody in the field. So states have also started to see that process and have started doing it. Incrementally introduce things, sometimes pull back a bit. You do it in public and it oddly distracts from the fact that it's happening. If you kind of rolled the mechanism in and said, here it is, people would possibly be up in arms. But doing it in public and doing it step by step actually gives you, weirdly, some cover and some assistance in getting through things that might be harder if you kind of brought in a sharp change all at once.
Right. And, is there anything else that you can give us tips about in our fight against this this Panopticon being built in public?
Yeah, I mean, we're not the only people at SATO who are doing stuff about this, right? It kind of feels a bit like the Rebel Alliance. You've got some Wookiees over there and there's some different people. I'll make Proton Mail the Wookiees because they're cool. You have a bunch of projects like that, Mulvad, Nim, the different VPNs, etc., that set out to help people just stay anonymous, stay private in their daily activities, whatever they are. People who try and offer services that are not bundled into hideous data collection monsters, etc. And I think that's cool. You've also got direct people talking about these things, Chaos Computer Club, EFF, etc. And then there's, what we're trying to do at SATO, which is, I think, really strongly aligned with some of the Fediverse, etc. kind of project in intellectually, but I think there's a big and important difference with what we're trying to do in that SATO is a full network that has a couple of properties that you don't see in things like Proton Mail, etc. I mean, Proton Mail is fundamentally part of the internet and it's fundamentally centralized. So there's someone to come after, there's someone to shut down. I mean, God bless the Mulvad guys. There's a great, internet story about the Swedish police turning up and asking for all their records, and Mulvad saying absolutely, because they had none. They'd simply kept no records because that's what they said they were doing, and they'd made sure legally that's what they're allowed to do, and they had no customer data to give anyone, and just anonymous numbers. And I think that's a good start, but they could still come to the Mulvad office and turn the machines off and possibly force admin access onto the machines that they run in data centers around the world and turn them off, right? So there's still a centralized point of failure. SATO is both a network, so it can operate on the internet, but it could operate on other communication platforms. And it also comes with the full set of things you need to communicate, like an identity system, protocols on how you communicate, how the messages work, and a funding model. It makes it profitable for people to carry the messages around. So it creates an economic incentive at all times to find another way if the primary way is blocked off. And I think that's a really important part of the puzzle. So definite, friends with the others in the Rebel Alliance, but I think what we're doing is also a really, really important part of making sure that we have a fundamentally open network around that can resist this stuff.
Exactly. I think like the higher the fences, the more we need to have all our gopher holes ready all over the place, or pole voting polls to get past the restrictions and make it in a way very, very not cost effective to plug those holes or to break those poles, right?
Right. Or to create a business model that only gets more profitable for people to subvert or to get around these controls, the stronger the controls are. And I think that's, I won't go on and on about the SATO mechanism and how it does that, but essentially trying to throttle the traffic or trying to block the traffic creates a backlog of profitable traffic that you can make money out of getting back onto the network by whatever method you want. And that, I think, is the difference that makes me wake up every day and keep working on SATO, because I think that's something we don't have anywhere else in the ecosystem.
Right, right. There used to be this idea in the crypto space that most builders should be anonymous in order to, protect themselves from being doxxed or, all these kind of security reasons, right? SATO did it the other way around. It was always public with both yourself and David. What we are noticing now, though, is that the state is becoming secretive with the backroom deals and legislation approved by committees where it's very difficult to see who voted for what and who was against. And how do you read this flip where the crypto punks used to be anonymous. Now they're coming out in the open and they're, talking to the camera and starting podcasts, while the politicians, they don't want to take any questions from the journalists, and they do all their deals behind closed doors.
Well, I think it's kind of amusing from my position, because I've been on innumerable crypto panels and stuff where it's me and then two cartoon monkeys and a cat speaking on the panel. And that was done for various reasons. It was done to seem like Satoshi and to have some kind of internet cool. It may have been done because people didn't have any clean shirts from time to time, or a decent backdrop. But it was also done, honestly, by and large in the crypto space to help execute rug pulls. It was because people didn't want to be able to be connected to whatever they were running. There was and continues to be some danger to serious crypto founders, like someone of the ilk of Vitalik or whatever, who, have obviously become potential targets for a number of reasons, including wealth, because of what they've achieved and what they've helped build, which is concerning, but that's not really, I think, central to these things. And I think it's kind of funny because building SATO, David and I were always presenting it as an open network for people to, interact on, privately and legitimately, etc. And so we've always been out in front of, like, please come and see what we're building, join in, make this a community thing, make this something bigger. And while we've always been doing that, I think you're right. There are more and more backroom deals being done. There is more and more, especially backroom lobbying being done between internet companies striking deals on data collection, but also on agreeing the shape of internet regulation, etc., so that it's in everybody's interests who's in that room. And there's more and more of that being an exclusive and maybe not public space. So that's something that certainly worries me.
Do you think that this idea that we can vote our way out of this encroachment of individual rights and freedoms is it still possible, or is it naive, and maybe we should just focus on building tools to regain our rights?
Yeah, I think it's a combination. Oddly enough, I've seen some really great policies from a party in Australia called the Australian Sex Party, who were about all sorts of things. I think they started off as a sex workers' rights organization, but they had really solid policies on things like internet privacy, etc., etc. They weren't, though, and this is the problem, they weren't comprehensive because it wasn't the primary intent of the Australian Sex Party to come out with policies on how to ensure a long-standing open and public internet. So I think that kind of, until you see parties that see it as existential, that they have solid policies on these things that are in everyone's interest as something they need to have before they can actually, successfully run, I don't think that's going to be a thing. The other thing is that, unfortunately, because the internet is so naturally international, you get a lowest common denominator thing. So every particular state can argue, it's Russian, whatever it is, or, Nigerian fraudsters, or, fiendish child, molesters from some other place that we're protecting you from, right? So there's a lot of ability for states to kind of walk both sides of the fence when they're talking about these things. So I think it's really problematic. Hence the very pragmatic approach we've taken at SATO of building in opposition to this. Love the work of the EFF. I love the work of, again, like groups like Proton, etc., who've built real tools and pushed things out to people. The EFF got in front of potentially having SSL be illegal and made it universal. And so everyone gets encrypted internet for the most part on most websites now, because the EFF and Mozilla and people worked hard. So I think it's actually incumbent to make the reality by building things in the first place, because you take more ground that way, and it becomes harder to take it away, and it pushes directly back against any kind of attempt to, or all the various attempts, not any kind of attempt, but the various attempts to kind of chip away at the edges or just bulldoze across the top of things we take for granted in terms of how and why we're allowed to use what tools on the internet.
Yeah, I'm very happy for SSL and NDA and ASA and all the other acronyms.
Well,
No,
it's also the NSA and other people. So
the NSA, the CIA, and all the three letter acronyms, right? Yeah, a lot of those. But yeah, okay. So the reason I asked you that question was because we had this question / I don't know, description or an entire argument sent in from a Canadian citizen who was concerned about sweeping legislation in Canada that could affect even SATO. And we're talking about stuff like Bill C-22 and Bill C-34 and what else do we have here? I have a lot of them in the notes. So basically, it's like a sweeping change, but this change is based on the Web 2 model. So all the things around it are, if they're trying to punish you, they're punitive in a Web 2 manner. So the question would be, can regulators shut down Web 3 sites like SATO.io, or are we in a way safe from these changes?
yeah, so I mean, first of all, shout out to AS. I won't dox you, but thanks for the questions. I mean, it was a great amount of text in them, but really useful and interesting. And interesting enough, I thought we'd want to talk about them here today. Second thing is, good Lord, Canada. I mean, what we're seeing here is emboldenment and, Australia being world leading. They love to say world leading social media ban. It seems to me like a kind of a world leading, I don't know, bad taste or something. It's a really odd turn of phrase. But what you can see here is like the Australians did it, and then various European jurisdictions, the UK did it. Now Canada's come in harder and faster and hotter than any of those. I mean, the legislation is quite stunning to read how comprehensive it is. And at the heart of the question is, could it actually lock off even something like SATO? So I think, what we've seen I've talked about this with the California laws and whatever, and we've talked about it a couple of times, is one of the weird things and problems with a lot of these laws that are coming out is just their ineptitude. The legislators have come out who don't really understand how computers work, and they're making laws or trying to make laws about how the fundamentals of the computer should start up or whatever, because it needs to check if your age on the way out. And so this is one of the big things, is they've really taken Web 2 as a model. They haven't seen that there's non-centralized, non-provider based ways of doing it. So they've kind of thought through it in case, okay, what if it was a Canadian provider with all their servers in one place in Canada? Okay, well, we just tell them to turn them off. What if they're not in Canada? Oh, okay, we tell Canadian ISPs that you're not allowed to connect to it, et cetera, et cetera. Oh, we could block the URLs and so forth. And I think what you see there is you'll see something similar to different countries' attempts to regulate cryptocurrency. Easy enough to say you can't advertise it or control various things in those ways, and you'll then see Monero stickers all over the lampposts in town. But very hard to get down to complete lock off. And what happens is you can get down to, well, okay, you can lock off your financial system, etc., but you can't stop people sending cryptocurrency to each other. That's just technically not possible because they can do it even in person over local connections, and you therefore can't really stop people doing peer-to-peer, cash for crypto type transactions. And that, I think, is kind of indicative, but not quite the same as what happens with SATO, because the difference is what we're talking about. If you're trying to shut down SATO, is you're trying to shut down the information itself. So you're not even you don't have the banking system there where the money needs to eventually end up in some kind of flow, and you've got attempts to force people off cash to totally button up that scenario around the world. With ideas, it doesn't work like that. Once you've seen the idea, once you've communicated, once you've shared whatever it is, it's shared. It's the human interaction that is the payoff from sharing information. And so, short answer, the TLDR is no, you can't, because you can't possibly stop people from connecting using whatever method. you can hit people with the things that can try and make internet usage difficult. But as we can see from places like China and Iran, people still get their hands on VPNs and other tools to get around that. And unless you want to lock your country off completely, shut the internet down, which happens from time to time in different places to prevent the spread of ideas. Unless you do that at great cost, it's entirely impossible to stop something like SATO. Even if you did shut off the internet, that actually creates a case where maybe it's not great for a video call or sort of live interactions across the chain. But you're then creating a massive market to smuggle out messages, and SATO provides a way of rewarding whatever courier system got those messages out and onto the rest of the network from wherever they're being blocked at. And that, to me, is a really critical part of the design and a real critical part of building networks that are resilient to this sort of stuff. It's not just thinking about, what do we do if they turn off this server or that server or block domain names, etc. You want a network that is robust enough that it's actually agnostic as to how people communicate underneath it.
But what does that mean? I mean, what does that mean? Like, how would that work in practicality? Because I've been trying to figure this out myself, and I don't understand it. Like, with my technological level, I don't understand what could I do. Like, how do I write it? I have information on a USB stick, and then I connect it to someone who's running a node somewhere, and then it gets synced. Or how would that work in practicality?
Right. So literally, what SATO does, the way it works, is nodes get paid for what they do in terms of getting transactions into the blocks on the network, right? Which is just the flow of information. So you can attach a fee, users attach a fee. Now, normally when you're sending them over the internet, this will be an absolutely tiny fee because it doesn't cost much to get my message across the internet to you. But I could add a $5 fee or a $50 fee. Now, the trick here is that the way the network works, that fee can be paid to any bearer of that information, which is most certainly encrypted and not readable to that bearer. But you're essentially creating a competition, because I can fill 5 USB sticks with that data on it, hand them to 5 different people, and whoever can get that connected onto a machine that's connected to the network will get that payout, or their portion of that payout, first. So you create a natural economy for moving information around and a natural payment system for that. So that, to me, is something that other networks don't have. You could still, it could still just be someone, from the Rebel Alliance wants to get that USB stick full of, Death Star diagrams, to the other rebels, and they'll do it because they just really want to. But this means they can give it to a smuggler who'll do it for the cash, and they'll do their part too. And that's, I think, they don't have to end up being a smuggler with a heart of gold. They can just be genuine mercenaries, and it creates a marketplace for that. And I think that's the difference, is if you have that robustness, then it's always going to be whack-a-mole. I mean, the stories are centuries old of trying to control information flow and banning printing presses and arresting people for running around the streets with pamphlets and stuff back in the day. What we've got is an ability to have a way of making it a market economy, a market drive to get information and to get it dispersed. And that's something unique, as far as I understand, to SATO, and that's something that I think is quite different. It means, with all of the different bits and pieces, like the identity management, so you can send information that way. Once that USB stick gets plugged in at the other end, the message knows where to go. It doesn't need, another form of addressing. There's no middle person in the addressing system. It's got stamps attached to it, essentially. It's got payment for where it's going. And that's all independent. That's not based on there being a central authority who honors anything, et cetera, et cetera. And that's why it's robust.
So if I would compress all you just said into the most simple thing that I can imagine, would be something like, let's say I am in a country that has very strict bans on the internet. I want to get a message to a friend in a different country. I know that friend has access to the SATO network. I put that information on a USB stick with a fee, let's say $100, or maybe put 10 sticks in, and I just give it out to people. The first person to connect to a SATO node will get part of that fee attributed to their SATO wallet, even if that wallet is something that gets created instantly the moment they connect to the network, right? So it's like an anonymous wallet, and they can take that fee and send it to another private wallet, so it can remain completely private. I mean, this would have been great if they had it
on the spot. They can just sell a USB stick for cash and hand it to someone else who's going to send it.
Right. Let's not just put even more steps in the process, because we're trying to simplify it.
I'm just trying to say it's got a value. Yeah.
Yes. I understand. I think that was pretty clear that it has a value. Cool. So this would have been great in Rogue One when would have solved a lot of problems there. But that's a very cool idea. I mean, this concept that you can literally just take a transaction, put it on a stick, and then just have it walk or travel through the real world, and then continue its journey through the network until it reaches the person that it was meant to reach. That's a very interesting and very cool concept.
The prestige of all of that is that proves that it works. But this is important because it proves that each piece of that puzzle works, right? And what's important about that is it's hard to imagine that someone would actually, you think, we're using Rogue One as the analogy, right? You've got Darth Vader running around chasing droids. But the identity part of that is critical, and that matters right now, today, right? The ability to autonomously create an identity and then share that with someone and have them be able to send you messages without anybody else knowing that identity exists or what it is, etc. The ability for people to do that kind of thing without there being needing to rely on the existence of intermediaries or intermediaries behaving or following some rules, etc. All these pieces being there means that if any one of those pieces falls off or gets blocked or gets attacked in the existing state, that we have a solution for that, right? So we're looking at the extreme case and saying, even then, this would still work. But where that's really important is if we are where we are now and we lose any one of the pieces that we're solving with this model, we have a solution. And we know we have a solution because we can think of that extreme example. And that's why, I think people should be excited about it. It's like, oh, okay, you can't block nodes at the name level. You can't block them by cutting out DNS. You can't just shut off the internet and turn them off. You have to, basically just hold people still if you're going to stop the ability to share information this way. And I think that's why people can, why that example is useful.
Well, that's great. Now I'm confused again. So hopefully we can clarify what you just said in the next episode. But I get some of it. Some of it will remain a mystery to me. But hopefully our viewers are far more intelligent than I am, and they can piece it together and maybe tell us in the comments. But so a lot of cool stuff. Thank you so much, Richard, for the great insights that you just presented us with. And thank you everybody for watching. Don't forget the Open Internet Pod or Open Internet Pod. You have it right there at the bottom of the screen. Look it up, subscribe, share it with your friends. Exactly.
I tell people to smash like and subscribe. I learned that on someone else's podcast once.
Exactly. And share this stream with your friends, and hopefully we'll see you guys next week. Thank you so much for watching.
Thanks, everyone.